Joining us now, without further ado, Steve Bannon. He is the host of the #1 radio show in America, War Room, that is heard in the John Fredericks Radio Network Monday through Saturday, 6 days a week, 10 to noon, right on all of our stations and affiliates here. It is also seen on the Dish Network, Channel 219, on America's Voice News, and then 11 p.m. to midnight on Newsmax, my new favorite cable source for information, 11 p.m. to midnight on Newsmax on video. You can see it all then. Steve Bannon with us now. Steve, great to have you with us, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, John. Looking forward to next Monday and Tuesday at the Trump Hotel. Is going to be really, I think, fantastic. The Falkirk Center. Dave Bratt, Charlie Kirk, Jerry Falwell, they're ahead of the curve on everything related to the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, what's happened to the Christian faith over there. And I got to tell you, it's a huge lineup. We're going to be live there following you for 2 days. We're going to have some amazing guests and talk about some amazing topics, and just the speakers, the forums, the panels. If you want to know everything about what's the reality of the modern world, the rising hegemon, China versus the Alliance of Liberty, it's going to all take place next week at Trump Hotel. So it's going to be fantastic. Glad to be a part of it.
All right, and so am I, and I can't wait. And, of course, I'll be on 6 to noon. You'll be on after me, and then you'll be participating in the panels all day, Steve. So thank you for that. And we're looking forward to that. Monday and Tuesday, we'll be live there. John Fredericks Show, Steve Bannon, War Room, live as well. Steve, a lot of us would feel better in Trump world that want to see the president get elected to a second term. I just got elected delegation chairman for Trump in Virginia. We'd all feel a lot better if you were involved strategically in running the campaign. There's no question about it. I'm going to ask you right now, I got a lot of people tuned in, Steve Bannon. I want to ask you directly as a chief strategist, what does the Trump campaign, what does President Trump have to do? He's got 100 days to turn the corner and win.
Look, it's not about the people at the campaign. He's got terrific people over there. And it's really, I don't think so much, I think people are focused on the campaign more than the action that needs to be taken. He's the incumbent. And particularly we're in a very unique time in American history. I think the biggest crisis of modern American history, and that is this pandemic in the Chinese Communist Party, and everything that the Chinese Communist Party virus triggered. President Trump last night tweeted out the invisible China virus. I would like to call it the visible CCP virus, because you can see everywhere around you the destruction of it. And I think we have to confront that. If President Trump, and he's starting today, I think it's great, getting his briefings by the task force, and then, a couple of days a week, I think, briefing the press. When he was taking more active participation in this and charging this back in March, I think it was March 15th, his approval ratings on handling the pandemic were 51%. And every poll has shown that this is the highest thing in their mind, because it's so inextricably linked with our American way of life, whether that is the opening of the schools, the playing of football, the economy. They're on Capitol Hill right now. We're talking about numbers that would boggle people's minds only a few months ago. The bid and the ask on this last recovery bill is, hopefully the last recovery bill is $1 trillion to $3 trillion. These are types of numbers that are mind-boggling, and what they've done, what we've had to do to the Federal Reserve's budget. So I think by stepping back in, it's quite evident when he closed the border with China, when he stopped flights from Europe, when he declared a national emergency, his numbers were very high on this in the handling of the pandemic. They've cratered because people think for the correct reasons or the incorrect reasons, they've been disengaged in this. And that's where the numbers on the approval of the pandemic have fallen to what I think, 34 to 36%, 37%, whatever poll you're looking at. But I think I think it's a turning point of that. I think you're going to see the president get briefed, get up to speed by Birx and Fauci, his team, Redfield, and then he may make a few comments to the press. I hope that's not one of these long. He can't let the press take advantage and start asking questions off topic. It ought to be very focused on action, urgency, and focus. And if he does that, and we have huge, controversy right now about the opening of the school. How you're handling the social unrest that's come up in these cities. So I think today it just gets back to being focused. It's going to be fine. If you just take action and drive the action, things are going to turn around. And I just think you got to do that. You've got to just use your powers as commander in chief. Look, he described himself as a wartime president back in, I think, February or March. I think it was in March. Jason Miller on the show. That's where we started talking about that. At that time, his approval ratings of the pandemic were over 50%. You get approval ratings over 50. You get approval ratings on the pandemic over 50%. You're going to be reelected president of the United States. This is not astrophysics.
Is part of that not taking those ridiculous questions from this watered-down White House Correspondents' Corps that's in there with masks on? I mean, there's only 10 of them in there. It's not like before there were 50 people. You had a bigger pool, like people me there, that would ask a legitimate question. We've all been shut out. There's 8-10 people there asking the same gotcha questions. How is that helpful?
I think you lay out the ground rules. The ground rules is the president's not there to have a press conference. The president's there. He's going to get briefed by his team. He's taking action every day. And every couple of days, every other day, he may come up, make a few remarks, and then take one or two questions on the topic at hand, and about the things they're talking about. And that's it. And if you're not it, then you're not going to. You got to be very tough about this. And the country's in a crisis. The president's having these briefings to update you on the crisis. Now, if he wants to go out and do one of his press conferences, or Kayleigh's doing a press conference. I think the press briefing this morning at 11. She's terrific. You can have those. Have full access. The press ought to be able to ask any questions they want. And the questions are, a lot of them are tough questions. A lot of them are cheap shot questions. But that's different. That to me should be a press briefing. This should be very focused on the pandemic and solutions. Look, we have some huge issues before us. One is this latest relief bill, what the money's going to be used for, how it's going to be applied smartly. There's a lot of things in the economy, particularly about people having their hours cut, or they're still keeping their jobs but having their salaries cut. There's so many things they have to go through, plus the whole issue of schools. And then you're talking about therapeutics, potential vaccines, other things going on. I hope that he picks up from what he said yesterday and starts to focus on the Chinese Communist Party's involvement in this. Particularly, I think the biggest issue he ought to address immediately is, Mike Pompeo brought it up on Fox last week with Bill Hemmer, when he says, hey, we know that they had some sort of involvement. We think it's around the Wuhan lab, but because of their decisions, and we're demanding, or we're now working with people to try to get access. They haven't given access. I think it's time to stop asking. I think it's time for the United States to stop being a supplicant. It's very obvious that this virus destroyed the Trump economy that he had hitting on all cylinders. It's very obvious it took the country in a totally different direction. If you look at pre-January 21st, when Wuhan was shut down, and post, we're a very different country today. To me, the president, very simple. He has to go to President Xi and just say the following: you have 72 hours to open up Wuhan. Every lab you've got, full access to every doctor, every document, everything. We're sending an international coalition. The World Health Organization will be part of it, but not going to lead it. We're going to have the best scientists in the world from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, Japan, India, the United States, everywhere. They're going to be there in 72 hours. If you're not open in 72 hours, you are literally cut off from the United States dollar. We're breaking the convertibility of the Hong Kong dollar. We're going to sanction your 5 biggest financial institutions, and I'm going to give you 30 days. I'm going to sanction you personally. I'm going to sanction Wang Qishan and all your henchmen, and I'm going to seize your assets in the United States, which amount to hundreds of billions of dollars that you and your families have money laundered out of China into London and into New York City and other places, put in real estate and other assets. And I would throw the hammer down. I think it's time to stop the happy talk. I think it's time. This is not about tweeting. This is about confronting what the reality is. The reality is we have a virus we know very little about. Okay, this thing mutates. First of one thing, remember, why are we in this situation in July? Because virtually there was a consensus, not on war room pandemic, but there was a consensus that this virus was going to go away in the summer. But the exact opposite happened. This virus is impervious to heat and humidity. It also's biggest spread is asymptomatic spread. That ought to be a flashing red light to everybody. That's not SARS. That's totally different than SARS, although this is SARS too. This also seems to focus on the weak and the vulnerable, whether you're elderly, whether you have comorbidities, whether you're minority communities. And also, we don't even know about the antibodies. You could have it, and the antibodies, we don't know how long they last. My point is there's something with this virus we got to get to the bottom of. 6 months into it, it's time to stop talking among a group of professors. This is a national security issue. This is killing 1,000 people a day. And regardless of whether you think it's an overcount or an undercount, whether you think it's the worst thing in human history or it's not that big a deal, it's changed American life. And this is not Nancy Pelosi's fault. It's not Minority Leader McCarthy's fault. It's not Mitch McConnell, Schumer, President of the United States, or Joe Biden. This came to us from the Chinese Communist Party. And we as a nation have to stand up, focus on that, demand answers, not ask. The time for being a supplicant to the sea, they're laughing at us right now. The time for being a supplicant is over. We need to get into those labs. We need to interrogate these doctors. We need to find out every piece of research they had. We need to find out every virus they're working on. This whole concept of gain of function, these experiments, these gain of function experiments they were doing, we need to know what they were doing. And what you're going to find out, which is an open secret in the Five Eyes intelligence community, they have an active biological weapons program. That's basically a known fact, an open fact. We have to get to the bottom of that, because first off, to get to the bottom of this, we have no idea what they've got cooked up, and to just believe naively, right, that this thing just kind of happened to appear is ridiculous. And we know the chain of title of their decisions, whether it was a bioweapon or came from Wuhan. We know that they hid this. They hid it and lied to everybody in the world about it, and that's what's caused this destruction. The games have got to stop being played. And all these marginal conversations we're having is missing the point. We have to do this as a nation. If we don't do this as a nation, trust me, this is going to be the beginning of the end of America as a world power, okay? Because this is going to have long-term implications. And it doesn't have to be that. We have all the advantages with us. We have all the leverage. We can cut them off from all capital. We can cut them off from all technology. We can cut them off from our market. They can't survive. They're a paper tiger. But they need to start being treated like a paper tiger. We need to stop deferring to them. We need to stop being a supplicant. We need to start making demands and back those demands up with action. And if Mnuchin and the Treasury Department doesn't want to do it, then get a different Treasury Department. It's time to use the financial leverage of the United States of America. It's a bigger weapon than our armed forces. And look, as a former naval officer with a daughter that was in the 101st, I know the pride, patriotism, and strength of our military. But our financial leverage, is the most powerful weapon we've had. We've allowed the Chinese Communist Party to take advantage of this for years to build a totalitarian dictatorship. The Chinese Communist Party have inflicted nothing but pain and suffering on the Chinese people now for 70 years. And they could care less if the dams break on the Yangtze River. If they lose 100 million people, they could care less, right? This is a brutal dictatorship. We have to face this brutal dictatorship. If you're sitting there without a job, if you're sitting there without high school and college football, if you're sitting there with a totally different life than you had back in January and a very uncertain future, it's not Nancy Pelosi, it's not McCarthy, it's not Schumer, it's not McConnell, it's not Trump, and it's not Biden. It is the Chinese Communist Party. That is what did this. They have to be held accountable, and they need to start being held accountable today. And the first way to hold them accountable is they don't turn over everything related to this virus from those labs, from their P3 and P4 labs, access to every scientist, every piece of data, every research, then cut them off and bring them to their knees. Because I'll tell you what, you cut them off, you'll be getting that information pretty quickly.
What is stopping President Trump from doing exactly what you just said, Steve Bannon?
I think there's conflicting things. Go back and look at Maria Bartiromo on Sunday. I'm sitting there breathing fire on this. You got to do this. It's followed by Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio has $160 billion of your assets under management. He's the largest money manager on Wall Street, or one of them. He has $160 billion of the deplorables assets, pension funds, life insurance companies, all of that. And he's the biggest proponent. He's the biggest cheerleader for China. The problem is Wall Street, and here's the central thing, is our financial and economic business system is inextricably linked with the slave labor of China and making basically all the other workers in our country serfs and throughout the world. That's the business model of the Party of Davos. That's the heart of globalism. That's why nationalists are so enraged by this, because it is the Chinese people that bear the burden of this. It's 800 million of the Chinese people barely have an existence. right? That's the slave labor force. Forced abortions, so the women keep working, right? The suicide rate of the young girls in these factories is enormous. Why? Because it's a slave labor campus. As we call it, forced labor. It's slave labor. Okay? That's what we got. That's the business model. The reason there's so much resistance to the people on Wall Street and corporate America. You know, it shouldn't be lost. You know, Joe Biden's the biggest globalist going. Joe Biden's the cheerleader for this. Joe Biden's the senator for Wilmington, Delaware. That's the heart of it. That's the mail drop for the global corporations. It's Wall Street, the global corporations. Our economic system's tied to this. Look at you've had Rosemary Gibson on. We've had her on. Look at the entire active pharmaceutical ingredients is all shipped over. What 90% of the API, you can't make penicillin, you can't make aspirin. It's all in China. Why? Higher profits. No concern about America as a country. No concern about the American people. No concern about our national security. Heck, we're 6 months into this, and they fight every day, tooth and nail. Whether it's Hong Kong or whether it's the drug situation, President Trump's had to fight nonstop. Now, I think it's time to take the gloves off and say, "Hey, look, you know, I got to put the Wall Street interests aside." On March 15th, his approval rating was 51% on handling the pandemic. In the second quarter of this year, right, ending June 30th, second quarter of this year, highest percentage increase in the history of the stock market, and his poll numbers dropped 8 points. There's no correlation. There is zero correlation between a healthy, robust stock market, I think, in these times, in re-election. It's about jobs, and it's about confronting this pandemic.
I agree with you.
But I'm the first guy that loves a healthy stock. Healthy capital markets, robust capital markets is a cornerstone of American capitalism. I got it. But it's not. It shouldn't be turned into a fetish. Okay, it's got to be looked at as what it is, a piece of the puzzle. And right now, you can't let the people that are participating in that and benefiting the most drive the train. They got to be in the back of the train. What has to drive the train is national security interests, the jobs, wages, and the American way of life as far as financial and economic security. Obviously, part of that is robust capital markets.
The problem is every time the president goes there, right? You got Stephen Mnuchin, Secretary of the Treasury, all the Goldman Sachs people, Wall Street, they all get on TV. They all say what a disaster it's going to be, and they all don't protect China. And then you get some mixed messages from the president who will be talking about his friend Xi Jinping, and he plays golf with Abe. It's not clear of what exactly.
Well, playing golf with Abe is good because he's our ally. No, look, you're not hearing any more of Xi's my friend. Last week, I think it was very important. Last week in the Rose Garden, when the guy asked him the question about, have you talked to Xi? And you're going to talk to Xi. He said, I haven't talked to him, and I'm not going to. Next question. I mean, that was, hey, in Beijing, that was, viewed as President Trump's had a sea change here. You're not hearing any more Xi's my friend. Xi's not your friend. Xi is your mortal enemy. Xi is the mortal. First off, he's the enemy of the Chinese people. They run this. There's only 90 million, and this is what's been so magnificent. If everybody goes back and reads these series of speeches we have up on War Room, and particularly Bill Barr, the Attorney General's speech, he lays out the war plan. This is it. President Trump has a coherent, cohesive war plan against the Chinese Communist Party in technology and in capital markets. It's laid out. Now, it's just got to be executed more. But, Barr, O'Brien, FBI Director Wray, Mike Pompeo, I mean, they're throwing down the hammer, and you see an organized effort. That's what I was saying, Maria, the other day. This is two sides of the same coin. If you get the pandemic side in the U.S. domestically as coherent and tight as is now war plans coming together, a Reagan-like war plan, right, converging on a point to really contain these guys and ultimately take them down. To me, it's quite, and I think, you haven't heard from Tony Blinken, you haven't heard from Jake Sullivan, you haven't heard any response of Biden. You haven't heard one peep of what they're saying when you have O'Brien, Wray, Pompeo, and Barr laying out the most comprehensive, huge difference in when we took over from Biden and Obama, change the whole of government approach to the Chinese Communist Party. His foreign policy advisors, it's been crickets. And here's the reason. This is where the American people are. This is where our allies are. This is where India, this is where Taiwan, this is where Japan, this is, where the EU's coming together. Right now, I don't say the same thing with Turkey and UAE and Saudi Arabia and Iran, right? It looks like they're on the other side, potentially on the other side, definitely Iran and Turkey, but UAE and Saudi Arabia may be on the other side of the football. So be it. The Alliance of Liberty is going to win this. And you haven't heard any, and I think, quite frankly, President Trump is driving this into a position that's going to be very difficult or impossible for Biden to go back and kowtow with his buddy Xi. If you want to talk about close friends, it's Xi and Biden. Right. Biden's the one that brags about the 30 hours of one-on-one dinners, which I think we ought to get transcripts of. I'd like to know where the transcripts are of those dinners. I'd like to know what he talked about besides, hey, can you give my deadbeat drug addict son who was kicked out of the Navy, can you give that guy a $1.5 billion so I can start a private equity firm to buy into surveillance companies that help surveil the forced enslaved labor of China. So I'd like to know that. That's a guy that's a buddy of Xi's is Joe Biden. And to me, do you want to smoke Biden out on an issue that he's going to lose by 15 or 20 points on? Smoke him out on China. Smoke him out on what his plan is to attack globalization. You smoke Biden out on this, and your American people are going to say, "Hey, I don't know if I agree with this guy. This guy's from the land that time forgot." Right? We're in a time now that globalists can't win. This is what Hillary Clinton, she was 5 times a tougher candidate than Joe Biden. There's no doubt about it. Right. Better prepared, sharper, tougher, meaner. Right? All of it. Right? She's far tougher than Biden. Biden's the weakest candidate you could draw. And it's now time to put the guns on him, put the focus on him, put particularly his record, particularly what he stood for his entire adult life. Because what he stood for his entire adult life is selling out the American man and woman who are working men and women in this country in the middle class. He sold them out. He sold them out to global interests. Because that was what he was there for. Right. That's why he's from Wilmington, Delaware. And that's why he kowtowed to the Chinese Communist Party.
Steve, we got 100 days. How do we get you back in this campaign?
You know what? They've got terrific people. It's not about this. I'm my focus. I have one focus in life, and that is take down the Chinese Communist Party. That is the central issue of our day.
If you don't get Trump reelected, you're not going to be able to do that, right?
I think if you just listen to War and Pandemic every day, you'll pick up the tidbits. No, it's not about. Listen, this is all about the White House. I think the campaign's terrific.
There's a movement.
We just lost. We just sent Greg Manns over. We just sent Greg Manns over to the campaign, so they'll be doing great. They took Jason Miller.
Jason's a good communications director, but you're the strategist. You do realize that the national movement amongst people like myself to get you back strategically running this campaign, right? You understand that?
Look.
There's a draft Bannon movement.
Yeah. Look, here's where you can productively put your forces to support the president today around the briefings he's getting, the action he's going to direct, and then these comments he'll make to the press and be a force multiplier. That's what the campaign's essentially a force multiplier to the actions he's taken as commander-in-chief as president. And look, President Trump's the best closer. He's a man of action. This is a time for action. He's already described himself as a wartime president, right? We're at a war. We're at war with as he calls it, the invisible China virus. I call it the CCP virus, and it's not that invisible. And we're at war with a totalitarian dictatorship that's really the greatest existential threat our country's ever faced. And that's what history this time is going to be about. It's going to be about this struggle. And we're seeing it every day regarding this pandemic and this horrific plague that they have visited upon their own people, the American people, and all humanity. And so it's time to hold them accountable. But John, I appreciate your kind words. But
look, I'm not going to stop.
Your co-producing of the War Room is your work for the country. So I thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Well,
appreciate the kind words.
I'm not going to back off our draft movement. I got to go, but just this final thing. Steve took the campaign over as chairman 2016. It was about 50 days to go, Steve. I think 60 was under 60 days. Steve goes in there, first day, goes to Trump Tower on a Sunday night, 5 o'clock. We got one guy in there, Andy Sarabian, and he's like, calls me up. He's like, there's one person in the entire campaign on a Sunday night. We got 50 days, and we're behind by 15 points. Like, where is everybody? That's the kind of leadership we need, Steve. That's why we want you in there. And that's
we had great. It was about 88 days, but we had great warriors like Andy Sarabian and Stephen Chung and Jason Miller. Look, it's not a personnel problem. It's not. It's an action. Just take action. Good things will happen. On March 15th, your approval rating was 51%. President's a man of action. Let's get action, urgency, and focus. Those three right now. We got, 100 and some days. It's not just that. It's not just the election. I understand this is the most important thing a lot of people's minds, but it's also where the country's got to go. We've got to. This pandemic is ridiculous the way this thing is played out. It's time to get this thing in back of us, get control of it, and at the same time turn our guns onto who's caused this, which is the Chinese Communist Party, and they ought to be held accountable starting today. Starting today. That's the action of the day, the plan of the day, and the action of the day. How's that sound, John?
I love it. Plan of the day,
Thank
action
you for
of the
your
day.
time, sir.
Stephen K. Bannon, thanks for being with us.